Well, hello everyone again. I'm Jill Bloom, publisher of Walls and Ceilings, Roofing Contractor, and Building Enclosure. Today is May 19th, 2020. Thank you again so much for watching, whether it's on our website or whatever social platform you choose to consume your content from. I'm here today with Art Aisner, the editor of Roofing Contractor, and Trent Cotney, who's the CEO of Cotney Construction Law, and also who's general counsel for several associations in the roofing industry. But as we all know, Trent is on the front lines battling legal issues for all contractors, especially since he has 14 offices across the country and 40 plus attorneys and 4 very special customer service representatives that help us all. And you can follow him on Facebook, LinkedIn, just to stay up on all his legal insights, which are so important for our industry. And we always appreciate your time, Trent, to answer questions that contractors have either sent us through the week or whatever you're hearing on the current crisis, hot topics, especially as this evolves and as we all evolve through this crisis. But speaking of hot topics, Trent, can you tell me what has been the hot topic or the biggest questions that are kind of coming up from this week?
Sure, and I want to thank you, Jill and Art, for having me here. It's always a pleasure. Like I said before we got on here, one of the best parts of my week right here. So appreciate all the contractors tuning in. I would say we have, as this thing has kind of morphed and evolved, the questions and sort of the things that are on the hottest topics have changed as well. And one of the things that we're starting to really see now is an uptick in cyber breaches, cyber fraud, people utilizing, either internet, social media, Zoom, Teams, all that kind of stuff to gather personal information. And just recently, we've had a couple of phone calls involving someone getting a hold of wire information and emailing different wiring instructions and having it go to a different account. So for everything that you're seeing, it looks like it's 100% legitimate. And you don't know until it's too late. And then it's a problem. You got to talk to the bank about it. You've got to check your insurance. And then you've got an upset customer or vendor on the other side that you've got to deal with. So what we always recommend is just sort of a best practice is before you make any wire whatsoever, pick up the phone and verify that information. Don't just take email. Don't just take a fax. People still do that. Pick up the phone, verify all that information before you see it. The other thing that we've experienced is a lot of people are using personal equipment now to connect, and they're at their homes where they have every single program known to man uploaded on there, Google Chrome extensions, all kind of stuff that potentially expose your company's data to breaches. And we had one contractor that contacted us recently with a data breach. So some of the stuff that we kind of asked them when this happened was, okay, what policies and procedures do you have in place? Have you identified what data you have? What precautions are you taking? Do you have cyber liability insurance? Okay, cyber insurance is relatively inexpensive, and I encourage any contractor out there that's listening to this to look into it, because it's not a matter of if, it's when. Unfortunately, I believe now that there is no such thing as privacy. Okay, anybody can obtain any information they want you at any time. It's just a matter of whether or not they want it. What you need to be able to do as a contractor is you've got to be able to put those precautions in place, those policies, those procedures in place, so that you can mitigate the risk. You can show your insurance company you're doing what you're supposed to do. You can try to stave off any potential liability. So we've seen that. We've seen everything from phishing attempts through emails and very convincing invoice submittals or Dropbox submittals, things like that. We've had fake Zoom and Teams and Google Hangout requests that will lead back to a different malware site or a ransomware site. So just be aware, be alert, and work with either your in-house IT professionals or outside IT professionals to take a closer look at your security. Everything from using VPNs if you're not at your company's designated site, to just make sure you've got those policies and procedures in place. Very tricky, and you're going to see a lot more of this as we continue into sort of this virtual world.
Trent, if just to follow up on that, for contractors that may not have cybersecurity elements in their crisis response plans or really as part of the insurance that you mentioned. Where do you start if you're listening to this and think about, I really need to make sure I'm not exposed?
So what I would recommend is you need to look internally, and first thing you need to do is ask yourself a series of questions. Okay, those questions would be, what data do I currently collect from my customers, my employees, and my vendors? Okay, of that data, what is personal information that, if exposed, I've got liability for? So if, for example, if someone wants to know whether or not I wear a similar dress shirt every day, that's not private information. Anybody can figure that out, right? But if they find out my social security number, then that's an issue, okay? So what you need to do is go through that process of identifying what is data that should be protected, okay? Then what you need to do is figure out who has access to that data, okay? Oftentimes it's not an external threat, it's an internal threat, a disgruntled employee, a sloppy employee, all kinds of things like that, okay? The next thing that you want to do is you want to figure out what hardware and software do you have in place to limit the risk. Okay, so that's not just firewalls and two-step authentication on financial type issues. It's going through and making sure that you have an active virus scanner, that you're updating and you're looking at all computer equipment that is used by your company to ensure that it's protected. Okay, one of the things that we've recommended is doing audits and assessing your ability to deal with a cyber threat. So how do you do that? You come up with a fake spam email that looks real, and you see how many of your employees respond to it, okay? And then that way, that gives you an understanding of where you are, and then you re-educate those employees that failed, okay? And probably make fun of them too, just kidding. But that's the idea, is you want to be able to help train your employees. And then obviously, you've got to have SOPs in place. You got to have those standard operating procedures that deal with what happens if there's a security breach. Okay, what are the protocols? How do you deal with it? What customers do you need to identify? Watch out on your document retention policies, both written and electronic. A lot of contractors are pack rats. Okay, unfortunately I've been in plenty of cases. Last one I can remember here last month, I had to go out to a contractor's site, and they said, here's the documents, go look at it. It was a semi-trailer, unair conditioned. So between the heat and the spiders, I went through about probably at least 10,000 plus documents in a couple hours worth of time. So you want to make sure that you're not a pack rat. Okay, have document retention and document destruction policies in place, and that's going to limit your potential exposure for data breaches because you're only keeping what's absolutely essential.
All right, great insight as usual. We're back into another week of reopening in different phases around the country. We've talked about it the last few weeks. Anything emerging in just since we last spoke about companies reopening and any enforcement issues coming to light?
Yeah, absolutely. A couple examples that we've probably seen on the news here recently, which I think are illustrative of kind of what's going on, is there was the gym in New Jersey that made the news where they were clearly violating the governor's orders. But at the end of the day, what happened is the police went out and said, you know what, you're all in violation, but I'm not going to enforce it. And that's what we've heard from a lot of sheriff's offices, is that, they're not going to enforce wearing a mask. They're not going to enforce distancing. They got enough problems. They're not going to worry about being a people police. But in some jurisdictions, you're seeing a much harder line. One real interesting thing is the city of Los Angeles. There was some recent suggestion that they may stay close to August. Okay, now it's a wait and see approach, but I can't imagine having to stay close to August. That's going to be really bad. I think right now everyone is struggling with the economy versus safety. And we haven't, like I've said before, in the weeks that we've talked about this, we haven't seen the true effects of what this impact is going to be yet, primarily because of the stimulus money and the PPP loan funds that have sort of stymied the losses. Okay, that's going to run out, and then we'll start seeing what it really looks like out there. But I think you're going to continue to see some tension. I think people in general are just fed up, and what that means from a safety standpoint, I don't know. We could have a big resurgence. I would expect that social distancing rules are going to continue to be in place. I don't see a big resurgence in a lot of things that we used to see pre-2019 just yet. But I think you're going to continue to see some standoffs and fighting, between companies and businesses that need to open, that want to open, versus the desire to maintain safety. And that's going to be a recurring theme here in the next few weeks.
And does that even apply in for roofers that are already in essential business status?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we've heard from roofing contractors just struggles with return to work. You've got some employees that are working from home now, and I mean, I'll be honest, we're struggling with it. We've got, I'm speaking out of our headquarters right now. We've got 20,000 square feet here, and I've got maybe 12 employees here in the office. So now we're designed to work remotely, and our production levels are still where they need to be, and we're still doing everything we're supposed to be. But there's the idea, talking to our employment staff, look, if I say, hey, you got to come back to work, and something happens, that puts liability on me as an employer, right? So roofing contractors are facing the same thing. If you've got people that are working remote and you summon them all back to work, there's nothing illegal about that. But you are potentially exposing yourself to liability if for some reason somebody gets sick and you force them back to work. So there's sort of a trade-off there. There's no clear answer there. It's not illegal per se, but you do have to kind of measure liability and take added precautions if you decide to call people back to work.
Okay. You mentioned the stimulus funding and the potential of that running out. It looks like Congress is also seeing that on the calendar. The House went ahead and passed another $3 trillion in stimulus funding last week. Not sure where the Senate's going to go with that. What should we expect from this latest round of funding, if anything?
So it's been real interesting. They've kind of made stuff up as they go, which from a lawyer's perspective, putting my lawyer hat back on, it's difficult for me to tolerate that, because I'm used to being able to read a set of rules, understand what the set of rules are, and that's what we follow. That hasn't been the case with any of this stuff. It's been a moving target. A great example of this, Art, is the SBA came out with guidance, I think on the 13th, on the eve of the safe harbor rule on the 14th, saying that if you received less than $2 million and you acknowledged that you need that money, that's all they're going to do with regard to that necessity requirement. They're not going to take any more investigation beyond that. Now, over 2 million is a different story, but that under 2 million, that came as a shock. It would have been nice of them to say that 2 months ago, while everybody was panicking. So with this new round, it did pass the House. Democrats have put forward a plan. The Republicans disagree with it. I doubt that. I think it's going to die at the Senate. Ultimately, I think there will be some additional funding that will come through. I don't know what it's going to look like, but I got to tell you, again, I'm not an economist, but my concern, at first I was concerned about inflation. Now I'm more concerned about deflation. And, I think the decreased demand, and we're seeing prices start to go down on certain key indicators, that can cause a lot of stagnation. And then ultimately, we've got an economy that's sort of in a tailspin that's not going anywhere. I'm just concerned, there's a price to pay for printing all this money up. It's just not, money doesn't grow on trees. And it sounds great, but, I think what we're doing with the economy is the same thing that we're doing with coronavirus. Okay, there's a lot of people that believe that we should take our lumps now from an economy standpoint, and it's going to be real sharp and it's going to hurt, but then we'll come through it. Okay, there are other people that believe we should flatten the curve. Okay, it's the same. That's what the economy mindset is right now. And again, I'm not an economist. I'm just a lawyer. I don't know one way or the other. But if I had to be a soothsayer here, I would say you can definitely expect something more along the lines of stimulus. There may be some additional stuff to help businesses, but those slew of bankruptcies that we've heard recently, JCPenney, Neiman Marcus, some of these other big box stores, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You're going to start hearing a lot more here as cash starts to run out.
And it does seem hard to believe that another round of stimulus funding wouldn't take place if, in fact, the hurting really does begin that close to an election.
Yep.
Again, come this fall.
Oh, for political reasons, you can expect to see some.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other news from last week, part of that coming out of the House, the loan forgiveness application was also released. What do roofers need to know about that?
So loan forgiveness is about as tricky as understanding whether or not you needed Paycheck Protection Program funds to begin with. So here's some self-help tips, okay? And this is high-level stuff. First thing is, remember, you've got 8 weeks from the time that the loans were dispersed. You got 8 weeks from there. Okay, that's the loan forgiveness period. You got to use at least 75% of your funds on payroll. Okay, you are potentially entitled to 100% loan forgiveness, even if you only use 75% payroll, but don't count on it. Okay, your best bet is use 100% for payroll if you can. Difficult to do that in an 8-week period. Okay. A lot of other things that if you start reading into it, retirement benefits could potentially count as something that's eligible for forgiveness. So if you have a matching that's due, if you've got some other retirement form that may be due and you're just pushing it off because tax has been extended, you might want to consider it now. Okay, what they're going to do is they're going to look at your total payroll. They're going to see not just the number of employees that you've hired, but they're going to look at what salary reductions you've had. And based on that, the lender is going to determine, hopefully with future criteria that the SBA is going to flesh out a little bit better as to what level of forgiveness you might be entitled to. Okay, so it's not a surefire bet, but definitely 75% on payroll, keep accurate records, be able to show where every penny went. And what I recommend is going to Treasury Department's website or SBA's website, download that PPP forgiveness form, and figure out what you need to do to maximize your chances. Don't wait till the end of the 8 weeks. Okay, figure it out now so that if you need to make moves to maximize your chances, you're making those moves. Does that make sense? I mean, the biggest problem I see with a lot of contractors is they wait until the very end and then they're like, okay, we're stuck with what we got. That's not going to do it with this if you really want forgiveness.
Okay. You're talking about pricing and the threat of possible deflation there. This kind of lines up. The federal government is making some moves to onshore some manufacturing when it comes to pharmaceuticals. Could we also start to see that with building materials? And is that a good thing overall?
Yeah, I think you're going to see a shift in a lot of how materials are created in supply chain logistics. We've talked in the past about, everything from drone usage to increase in inefficiencies as a result of technology. But I think that you're going to see a slew of heightened trade war type aggression, especially between China and the United States. And I think that's what that's going to do. It's going to force manufacturers to look into other alternatives. Because if these tariffs and these taxes and fees keep elevating, it's going to become too expensive to keep doing work over there. One of the suggestions that I've seen is that India may become the new China as far as outsourcing some of this manufacturing. But I do think that there's going to be a lot of tax-based incentives for companies to bring work back over here. My concern, I guess, is how long of a period of time this is going to happen. If it happens in a short period of time, I don't know whether or not the supply chain logistics are in place to properly service the contractors. Okay, if it can happen over an extended period of time, then I think we're in a much better position. So let me explain what I mean by that. If Trump comes out in a month or two and says, we're pushing tariffs up through the roof against China and elevates the aggression, because he believes it needs to be done or it's popular for politics or whatever, that's going to put a strain on suppliers. It's going to put a big strain on suppliers, and then manufacturers are going to have to scramble. They may not be able to scramble quick enough to figure it out. So that's what's going to be interesting here, is seeing what the next few months look like. And I would anticipate that there is going to be some additional aggressive rhetoric towards China as we get closer to November. I would not be surprised to see some additional tariffs or trade type sanctions against China as a result of coronavirus.
Right, and more in a punitive fashion,
right?
Coming across that way. What about how does that impact pricing though? And were you surprised to see prices drop for construction materials in April and also year over year?
Mm-hmm. Some of it I think is attributable to decreased demand, and some of it I think may be deflation. I think the cost of trucking materials is down because the price of gas is down. So when diesel's down, that's one of the biggest costs, to use shingles as an example. It's one of the biggest costs is freight, getting shingles from one. They're not, when you throw a bundle over your shoulder, you know what I'm talking about. They're heavy. Stuff like that, I think that is resulting in some of the price decreases. But again, I'm concerned about, this sort of stagnation, deflation type stuff where the demand is dead, so prices are going down. I think in the short term, it's probably a result of gas.
Okay. Just yesterday, the NRCA issued an action alert on liability safeguards for all employers. You may have touched on this earlier, but it seems a little bit broader than just stuff related to COVID-19. What's at stake here?
Sure. So I talked to NRCA, and we had mentioned this in one of our previous webinars, and that was concerns that there may be some significant liability for small businesses, especially contractors, that have potentially exposed customers to COVID, or even their own employees to COVID, that they have a way to get around workers' comp laws that normally prevent that from happening. So there's been a lot of suggestions. One of the things that we've kind of toyed around here and kind of talked about is having, similar to the BP oil spill fund, having a fund set up so that that's it, and then otherwise you're free from liability. There is going to be a slew of these suits that are going to come out. There's going to be a lot of concerns. One of the things that we've done on our end is put together several contract provisions that contractors can use for liability purposes. So when they go out, we call it a COVID-19 rider or addendum. You go out and you explain to the customer, you say, look, we're taking all these precautions to make sure you don't get it, but we're also concerned about having your, people that are living in your house exposing our employees to that. So what we're going to do is we're going to sign a mutual release and waiver, and we both agree that if we unintentionally exposed each other to COVID, then we're not going to hold each other liable for it. Now, obviously, that doesn't exclude if I know I've got COVID and I come up and cough on you. But the idea is to put a handful of provisions like that in place. You describe it to the customer as mutually beneficial and see if they'll sign it. And if they sign it, that at least gives you some added protection, because especially for those contractors watching this that are doing residential, you need to recognize that every job you go out on has a potential problem, because if any of those customers, regardless of whether it's you or not, if they end up getting COVID and something serious happens to them, then they may be looking at you as an exposure point. Okay, great example of this is we're representing several contractors right now that were involved in some of these nursing homes, and there's been some fatalities as a result of these nursing homes. So the owner of the nursing home is bringing in everybody that they can, every trade that was ever on that job site, every vendor that was on that job site, anybody and everybody. They're bringing them into these suits. It's causing their premiums to go up. It's a pain. So just think proactively about it. You can do a couple of things. One is contractually think about it, and two is make sure that you're advocating in front of your local, state, and federal politicians so that they can come up with a solution before it becomes a problem.
Is there any part of those riders that protects the roofers from the clients, potentially exposure the other way?
Absolutely. They're designed to be mutual, and that's how you sell it. Because if it was just one way in favor of the roofing contractor, it wouldn't work. So, one of the things we like to do is we like to say, hey, it's good for us, it's good for you. And, we're not going to intentionally expose you, but we can't guarantee that we can't unintentionally expose you to something. Here are all the precautions we're taking, but here's the release, here's the indemnification provision, here's the disclaimer, here's the waiver, here's all this stuff on there, and you explain it as good for them as well as good for you.
With all these concerns about liability, there might be some roofers out there that are unionized that might be, thinking, phew, we don't have to worry about all this, or not necessarily as much as the others. Mm-hmm. Could any of this spur an uptick in unionization, in the industry? And mm-hmm. What does that mean for, bidding processes and the path forward?
So unions have done a really great job in educating and making sure that the union members are safe. I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of different union contractors, and I would say they've really stepped up as far as their training, their educating, making sure that union members are doing the right things. I think that it is an opportunity for unions that want to expand. Employees, crew are concerned about their safety and their well-being, and it's nice to have someone that's sort of overlooking that. It's not to say that non-union shops can't do the same exact thing. They can. They do it all the time. But for those contractors that are union, that is one benefit that you can, say to the people that are working for you is, hey, not only are we looking out for you, but we know the union as well.
Okay. And final question. Officially, we now know that the Western States Expo will be virtual for the first time, obviously, because of this crisis. I know that you were planning on speaking as well as exhibiting. Tell us about what that means for changes for you, and what can roofers expect about attending this for the first time?
Well, it's going to be great. I think they really sort of pivoted, and I think they are going to put on a great virtual show. Tom Pappas and Joel Vieira and Leo Ibarra is the president right now, and Rob Wiegel's incoming president. They've all really sort of circled the wagons, figured out how to deal with the situation, and kind of move forward. So I'm excited to see what it's going to look like. I know there's going to be a lot of opportunities, and I've already heard that there's a lot of interest in it. So I would stay tuned. I think that I know the announcement came out, was it yesterday, the day before? So I would expect that there's going to be seminars and virtual expo type thing. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but I'm looking forward to it, and I think it's a great sort of pivot off of what otherwise would have been a cancellation. So.
Okay, well, the industry keeps innovating, so yeah, I think we're all going to be excited to kind of see what happens here.
The one thing I mentioned with Western States is when the force majeure, the act of God kind of thing came up and prevented them from being able to do the expo, the idea behind the virtual trade show is something unique. I don't know if I've really seen it, and I think we talked in the past about using technology as sort of to help bridge the gap. So I think that's one thing that I think we're going to start seeing more and more of from associations as they continue to kind of step up and look at different ways of providing value to their members.
Okay. Thank you, Trent. Jill, I'm going to throw it back to you.
All right, thanks again. Yeah, we're all excited for Western States. It's going to be exciting to see how all the virtual events launch and how we can all engage at a different level, right? But to everyone watching, thank you very much for joining us today. If you need to reach any of us, go to the contact tab on either Roofing Contractor or WSC Online. And you can go ahead and subscribe to our digital editions, our e-newsletters, so you can stay up to date with all the next videos that we do with Trent. And again, Trent, if you could, I know I always like to make sure you mention your website and how people can contact you. Can you do that quickly, please?
Sure. CotneyCL.com. All our information is on there. You can always reach me direct at tcotney@CotneyCL.com. One thing I'd like to mention is we are expanding into Canada. So our Toronto office is up and running, and we're looking forward to providing you guys more information on that.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well, again, thanks everyone for joining us today. Please stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you next time.